I always knew I didn't belong in the Caldwell family. My husband James's parents made sure I felt it at every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas gathering, every backyard barbecue in their pristine Connecticut home. The gold digger from the wrong side of the tracks, they'd whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. For 12 years, I smiled through their thinly veiled insults, their constant reminders that I wasn't good enough for their son. When James died suddenly last spring, I didn't just lose my husband, I lost any buffer between me and their contempt. At the funeral reception in their sprawling colonial home, my mother-in-law Eleanor cornered me by the catering table. "Now that James is gone," she said, champagne flute in hand, "there's really no reason for you to remain connected to this family, is there?" What she didn't know was that I discovered James's hidden journals 3 days earlier. What she couldn't have imagined was that I knew exactly what the Caldwells had done to secure their fortune and what they'd done to my own family 20 years before I even met James. Sometimes the universe works in perfect circles. That day, at my husband's funeral, I finally let the truth come out. The Caldwells weren't just wealthy. They were Connecticut blue blood wealthy, the kind with family photos at Martha's Vineyard, spanning generations, donor wings at Ivy League universities, and cocktail parties where senators mingled with hedge fund managers. Eleanor and Richard Caldwell had built their investment firm from millions to billions. Their Christmas cards featuring their perfect children, James and his sister Catherine, posed on sailboats, at ski resorts, in front of European landmarks. I met James at Dartmouth, where I attended on scholarship. I was Rebecca Sullivan from Bridgeport, my father a factory worker, my mother a nurse who worked double shifts. They had scraped together every penny for my education. When James first brought me home, Eleanor's practiced smile never reached her eyes. "Sullivan," she repeated, as if testing something bitter on her tongue. "Any relation to the Sullivans of Newport?" When I explained my Irish immigrant grandparents had come through Ellis Island, she simply nodded and changed the subject. The pattern was established early. At my first Caldwell Thanksgiving, Eleanor seated me between James' second cousin twice removed and their ancient family friend who was mostly deaf. James was placed at the opposite end of the table with Catherine and a parade of suitable girls from their social circle. Richard, always less obvious than his wife, would just pat my shoulder and say things like, "James always did have his rebellious phases." The worst was the summer barbecue before our wedding. Eleanor cornered me in the kitchen as I helped the catering stuff, something no Caldwell would ever do. "Rebecca, dear," she said, refilling her gin and tonic, "I've set aside some family heirlooms for Catherine when she marries. The emerald earrings, the Tiffany settings, things that should stay within the bloodline. I hope you understand." "Of course," I said, arranging deviled eggs on a silver platter. "James's trust fund is quite specific," she continued, eyes narrowing. "It's structured to protect family assets. His grandfather was very forward-thinking that way." The message was clear. I would never be trusted with Caldwell money. When we married anyway, they gave us a down payment on a modest house in a neighborhood they would never visit. A starter home, Eleanor called it, though we lived there all 12 years of our marriage. James worked at his father's firm, but was never given real responsibility. He would come home frustrated, drinking more each year, telling me it was just workplace politics. I later learned Eleanor had convinced Richard that James couldn't be trusted with major accounts as long as he was married to me. What none of them knew was that my grandfather Sullivan wasn't just any Irish immigrant. Back in Bridgeport in the 1970s, he'd developed a small but profitable manufacturing business, Sullivan Precision Parts. The company supplied components to defense contractors, growing steadily until a mysterious series of financial setbacks forced him to sell for pennies on the dollar. My father had always been bitter about it, convinced they'd been cheated but unable to prove anything. We never had documents, just family stories of betrayal. The greatest irony was the Caldwells' grand gesture, a scholarship fund they established at Dartmouth for underprivileged students with potential. They paraded me at the charity gala as their son's wife, the living proof of their generosity. "See what these people can accomplish with the right guidance?" Eleanor had said to the audience, her arm around my shoulder, squeezing just a little too tight. I smiled for the cameras, died inside, and went home to cry in the shower where James couldn't hear me. I never told James how deeply his family's rejection cut me. He was caught in the middle, loving me but desperate for his parents' approval. And somewhere in those 12 years, the bright, passionate man I married at 22 became a shadow, torn between worlds, belonging fully to neither. James died on a Tuesday. A heart attack at 42, no warning signs. One minute he was heading to work, kissing me goodbye with coffee on his breath, and the next I was standing in a hospital corridor while a doctor explained that sometimes these things just happen. But in the Caldwell world, things don't just happen. There are always appearances to maintain, narratives to control. Eleanor took over the funeral arrangements immediately. "We'll have the service at St. Thomas," she announced at the hospital, still in her tennis whites. "The Caldwells have been members for generations. The reception will be at our home, of course. Not our home, James and mine, but theirs, as if my husband was returning to where he truly belonged." The next 3 days passed in a blur of Eleanor's phone calls, Catherine's cold efficiency handling the details, and Richard's uncomfortable pats on my shoulder. I moved through our house like a ghost, touching James' things, his coffee mug still in the sink, his side of the bed still rumpled because I couldn't bear to make it. On the third night, unable to sleep, I went to his home office to find insurance documents Eleanor had been demanding. That's when I found the journals. They were hidden in a locked drawer of his desk, 12 leather-bound books, one for each year of our marriage. James had never been a journal keeper, as far as I knew. Inside were his private thoughts, his frustrations with his family, his deepening suspicions about his father's business practices, and finally, the truth he'd discovered just 3 months before his death. Caldwell Investments' first major success had come from acquiring and stripping several small manufacturing companies in the Northeast in the 1970s. One was Sullivan Precision Parts. James had found the old acquisition files while researching the firm's history for their 50th anniversary. The Caldwells hadn't just bought my grandfather's company, they had systematically undermined it first. Richard had used banking connections to deny critical loans, spread rumors about quality control issues, and finally planted a story about potential legal troubles. My grandfather sold in desperation, and the Caldwells dismantled the company for patents and equipment. The final journal entry was dated just a week before James died. I have to tell Becca. Everything she believed about her family was true. Everything she suspected about mine was worse than she imagined. What will this do to us? He never got the chance to tell me. The morning of the funeral, Eleanor arrived at my house unannounced. "I've brought something for you to wear," she said, holding up a simple black dress. "The Burtons will be there, and Senator Mitchell. We need to present a united front." I was already dressed in the red wrap dress James had always loved. "I'm wearing this," I said. "James bought it for our anniversary." Eleanor's face tightened. Black is traditional. Red is inappropriate. "I'm honoring my husband my way." Her mask slipped. "This isn't about you, Rebecca. This is about the Caldwell family saying goodbye to their son. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I almost gave in, as I always had. Then I remembered James's journals. "I'll meet you at the church," I said instead. St. Thomas Episcopal was filled with New England's elite, faces I recognized from charity galas and Christmas parties, where I'd been tolerated but never welcomed. The Caldwells had arranged everything. White lilies, I knew James preferred sunflowers, classical music, though he loved jazz, and a minister who spoke about a James I barely recognized. At the reception, their colonial home transformed into a showcase of dignified grief. Eleanor stationed me near the entrance to receive condolences, then largely left me alone. I overheard her telling guests, "She's holding up as well as can be expected. We'll make sure she's taken care of course, though the prenup is quite specific." Catherine cornered me by the bar. "Mother wants me to go through James' things with you next week. There are family photos and heirlooms that should stay with us." I nodded numbly, watching Richard accept sympathies from business associates, including Maxwell Burton, the man who, according to James' journals, had helped pressure my grandfather's largest client into canceling their contracts 40 years earlier. As I stood by the catering table, picking at a plate I couldn't eat, Eleanor approached with 2 board members from the family foundation. "Rebecca was our inspiration for the scholarship fund," she told them, her arms sliding around my waist. "Such potential when given the right opportunities." That's when something inside me finally broke. "The right opportunities," I repeated, my voice carrying just enough to turn a few nearby heads. "Is that what you call it, Eleanor?" Her smile froze, fingers digging into my waist in warning. "Rebecca, dear, you're upset. Perhaps you should lie down." I stepped away from her grasp. "I've been lying down for 12 years. I think it's time I stood up." The room hadn't fully quieted yet, but Richard was approaching now, concern etched across his face. "Everything all right over here?" "No, Richard, everything is not all right," I said, louder now. "James is dead, and he died without telling me what he discovered about your company, about what you did to my family." Eleanor's face drained of color. "This is neither the time nor place." "When would be a good time, Eleanor? After you've cleaned out our house of anything valuable? After you've written me out of James' life completely?" My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. "Sullivan Precision Parts. Does that name mean anything to you, Richard?" Richard's expression shifted minutely, a flicker of recognition before his practiced neutrality returned. "Rebecca, you're distraught. We understand. My grandfather's company, the one Caldwell Investments deliberately tanked before acquiring it for nothing in 1978, the one whose patents made you millions, while my family lost everything." The room was silent now. Catherine stepped forward. "You're making a scene. Dad had nothing to do with—" "James found the files," I cut in, "3 months ago while researching for your precious anniversary celebration. He kept journals." I pulled one from my purse, the last one, and held it up. He documented everything. The manufactured quality control rumors, the canceled loans, Maxwell Burton's role in pressuring clients to drop their contracts. Burton, standing near the fireplace, suddenly became very interested in his drink. "This is absurd," Eleanor hissed, but her eyes darted to Richard. "Is it?" I opened the journal to a marked page. "Dad finally admitted it today," I read James' words aloud. "Said it was just business, nothing personal. Doesn't understand why I can't let it go. Doesn't see the connection to Becca's family. Or doesn't want to." Richard stepped closer. "Whatever James may have written, misunderstood, this isn't. He died knowing what you did," I continued, my voice breaking. "To my family, to his career. The son you kept under your thumb because he chose me. The son you undermined at every turn because you couldn't control who he loved." Eleanor grabbed my arm. "That's enough. How dare you use James' death to spread these fabrications?" I pulled away. "Fabrications? Should we call Maxwell Burton over? Ask him about the meeting at the Griswold Club where you planned how to devalue Sullivan Precision stock? It's all in here, Eleanor. Names, dates, dollar amounts." The room had become uncomfortably quiet. Faces I'd seen for years, but who had never truly seen me, were watching with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and, from a few, a glimmer of something like respect. You have used me as your charity case for years, I said, voice steadier now. Your scholarship poster child, your proof of generosity, all while knowing your fortune was built partly on destroying my family's business, the very reason I needed scholarships in the first place. Catherine stepped between us. You need to leave. I nodded. Yes, I do. But first, I turned to address the silent crowd. The Caldwell Family Scholarship Fund was built with stolen money. My husband discovered this, and the stress of that knowledge likely contributed to his heart attack. I'm donating my portion of James' estate to establish the James and Rebecca Sullivan Caldwell Foundation, providing legal assistance to small business owners facing predatory acquisition tactics. I looked directly at Eleanor. James wanted to make this right. Since he can't, I will. Richard moved toward me, his voice low. Rebecca, let's discuss this privately. There's no need for... There's every need, I said. 12 years of needs. My husband is gone, and with him, any reason to keep your secrets. I placed James's journal on the mahogany side table. I have copies of everything. James made sure of that. Eleanor's face contorted with rage. You think anyone will believe you? The gold digger making accusations after her meal ticket dies? The room collectively inhaled. I smiled for the first time that day. That's the thing about evidence, Eleanor. It doesn't care who presents it. I looked around the room one last time. Thank you all for coming to honor James. He deserved better than this family. And now I have a funeral reception to attend for the man I actually knew. As I walked toward the door, I heard Richard's urgent whispers to Maxwell Burton, Catherine's attempts to redirect guests' attention, and Eleanor's sharp intake of breath as several attendees began to follow me out. I stepped into the sunlight, leaving behind the house where I'd never belonged. The fallout was immediate and seismic. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with texts from people who had witnessed the confrontation. 3 of Richard's business associates followed me to a nearby cafe, not to confront me, but to discreetly offer their cards and request meetings. We've had similar experiences with Caldwell tactics, one said carefully. Catherine called 17 times that night. I finally answered near midnight. You've destroyed our family, she began. Your family destroyed itself, I replied, and mine decades ago. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Did James really know about Sullivan Precision? Yes, read the journals if you don't believe me. Another pause. I always thought you weren't good enough for him. I know what you thought, Catherine. But he loved you. Her voice cracked slightly. Really loved you. Not like my parents' marriage. Not like any marriage I've seen in our circle. I didn't respond. After 12 years of Caldwell coldness, I wasn't about to comfort her. Did you mean it? She finally asked. About the foundation? Every word. 2 days later, a young attorney named Michael Prescott contacted me. He specialized in corporate accountability and had been quietly building cases against Caldwell Investments for years. Your public statement broke the dam, he explained as we sat in my living room. Catherine called 17 times that night. I finally answered near midnight. You've destroyed our family, she began. Your family destroyed itself, I replied, and mine decades ago. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Did James really know about Sullivan Precision? Yes, read the journals if you don't believe me. Another pause. I always thought you weren't good enough for him. I know what you thought, Catherine. But he loved you. Her voice cracked slightly. Really loved you. Not like my parents' marriage. Not like any marriage I've seen in our circle. I didn't respond. After 12 years of Caldwell coldness, I wasn't about to comfort her. "Did you mean it?" she finally asked. "About the foundation?" Every word. 2 days later, a young attorney named Michael Prescott contacted me. He specialized in corporate accountability and had been quietly building cases against Caldwell Investments for years. "Your public statement broke the dam," he explained as we sat in my living room. "3 former executives have come forward with documentation. They were always too afraid before." "Afraid of Richard?" Michael smiled grimly. "Of Eleanor, actually. She's the true power. Richard's the face, but she's the enforcer." This didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was discovering that James had contacted Michael 2 months before his death. "He sent me some initial documents," Michael explained. "We were supposed to meet the week after he passed." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. James had been planning to make things right. He'd been braver than I'd given him credit for. Within a week, the Wall Street Journal ran a feature on the Caldwell method, decades of predatory acquisitions targeting family-owned businesses. Former employees detailed Eleanor's ruthless strategies and Richard's willing participation. The SEC announced an investigation. Caldwell Investments stock plummeted. The most unexpected twist came from my father. After reading about the Sullivan Precision connection, he dug out a box of my grandfather's papers from our attic in Bridgeport. Among them was a faded photograph of my grandfather with his business partner, a man named Henry Caldwell, Richard's uncle. "They were friends," my father explained, voice thick with emotion. "Real friends, not just business. Henry opposed the acquisition, fought Richard on it. That's why they pushed him out of the company afterward." The revelation added another layer to the betrayal and explained why Eleanor had always seemed to hate me with particular intensity. I wasn't just any scholarship girl. I was the granddaughter of the man whose betrayal had caused a permanent rift in the Caldwell family. As spring turned to summer, the Caldwell empire began to crumble. Major clients withdrew. The board forced Richard into early retirement. Eleanor, defiant to the end, sold their Connecticut mansion and retreated to their Nantucket compound. The scholarship fund was quietly dissolved. I received a letter from an unlikely ally, Richard's sister, Margaret, who had maintained minimal contact with the family for years. "What they did to your grandfather was unforgivable," she wrote. "What they did to you and James was worse. He would be proud of you." She enclosed a photograph I'd never seen. James at about 7, helping his elderly great-uncle Henry tend a garden. On the back was written, "James with Uncle Henry, the last good Caldwell." With Michael's help, I established the foundation as promised. We focused on providing resources to small business owners facing corporate bullying tactics. I sold our starter home and moved to a small apartment in Boston, where the foundation was headquartered. The greatest healing came unexpectedly. 6 months after the funeral, Catherine contacted me again. "I've left the firm," she said without preamble. "I've been going through Dad's files. There's more, so much more. I didn't know, Rebecca. I swear I didn't know." I believed her. Catherine had been as much a prisoner of Caldwell expectations as James had been. We met cautiously at first. Coffee shops, public places. She brought more documents, more evidence of her parents' ruthless business practices. Slowly, awkwardly, we formed something like a friendship built on the wreckage of shared pain. "You should have been my sister," she said one evening after too much wine. If they had just seen you, really seen you." A year after James died, I scattered his ashes in the Connecticut River where we'd had our first date. Catherine came with me. So did my parents, who had never really known him in life. As the ashes drifted away, I finally let myself grieve, not just for James, but for the family we might have had if greed and pride hadn't poisoned everything. Eleanor never apologized. I never expected her to. Richard sent a brief note acknowledging regrettable business decisions, but stopped short of taking personal responsibility. The foundation flourished. In our first year, we helped 7 family businesses fight off predatory acquisition attempts. Each victory felt like reclaiming a piece of my grandfather's legacy. Each client who kept their independence was a small rebalancing of scales that had been tipped against ordinary people for too long. I kept James' journals. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I read them and discovered parts of my husband I never fully knew in life. His struggles, his gradual awakening to his family's true nature, his determination to make amends. In his final entry, he had written, "Wherever this leads, I choose Becca. I choose truth. I choose to be a Sullivan in spirit, if not in name." It was the last gift he gave me, the knowledge that in the end, when it truly mattered, he had chosen love over legacy. It's been 3 years since that day at the Caldwell mansion. The foundation now helps dozens of small businesses annually, and Catherine works alongside me as our legal director. Sometimes I think about Eleanor, alone in her Nantucket house with nothing but her pride and her memories. I wonder if she ever realizes what she lost, not just money or status, but the chance to know her son as he really was, to welcome the family he chose, to be part of something genuine instead of something merely impressive. I've learned that family isn't about bloodlines or balance sheets. It's about who stands with you when the truth comes out. It's about choosing love over legacy, substance over appearance. James taught me that in death, even more than in life. So if you're out there feeling like you don't belong, like you're never enough, remember that sometimes the very people who make you feel small are the ones living the biggest lies. Your truth is your power. And when you finally speak it, you might be surprised who walks out the door with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of truth and transformation. Share in the comments if you've ever had to stand up to family expectations or choose your own path. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply to tell your truth and then walk away with your head held high.